Maybe you've never really stopped to think about it, but instinctively, we all feel it. Between friends or strangers, it's sometimes manifested in subtle ways. But in the end, wherever there's more than one person, there are social dominance dynamics. So what is this about? Well, it's going to take a little while to explain, but before you get into it, I want you to keep two things in mind. First, this formula is a way to understand who's in control of the social situation and why. Second, maybe you clicked on this video because you like the idea of dominating everywhere all the time, to be an alpha male or a slay queen. And there are a lot of reasons not to try and do that. In any case, everything we describe here is situational. Your level of the traits that create social dominance will vary depending on where you are and who you're with, meaning that it's basically impossible and really not desirable to dominate every situation. With that in mind, let's look at the first part of the formula. Imagine you're at some sort of party, a formal event, something with work colleagues or your extended family. You get into a conversation with this lady, and you soon start to regret it, because unlike you, she doesn't feel restricted by the setting. As the conversation continues, you become painfully aware that she's willing and able to say anything that pops into her head. The first part of our formula is called range, and it's all about feeling free to say and do whatever you want. But when psychologists talk about personalities, they usually refer to these 5 traits. And although our formula is situational, we're going to use these permanent traits as a reference point. The traits that are most relevant to range are openness to experience and agreeableness. Openness is about intelligence and creativity. It's kind of relevant here because people with high openness to experience are used to thinking outside the box and find creative ways to test boundaries. More relevant, though, is agreeableness. Agreeableness is basically about how important it is for you to keep other people around you happy. At the extreme high end of the scale would be the person's only able to be nice, regardless of the situation. At the other end are people who really don't care how their behavior affects others. Put low agreeableness and high openness together, and you get somebody who's willing to go further than others to exhibit personal freedom by testing boundaries. Now, there are 2 ways people play the range game: expanding and restricting. Let's go back to our new friend to take a look. In this scenario, given the formal setting, you feel restricted to polite greetings and small talk. But range expanders exhibit freedom by showing that they are willing to push the boundaries of social norms. Whether they dance on the edge of the acceptable or jump right off might depend on who they're up against. To be dominant in range is to display higher range than those around you. It follows then that the alternative way to play the range game is to restrict others. Range restrictors try to impose boundaries on other people, most often by invoking norms of moral behavior, backed up by social, political, or religious belief systems. In practice, people often use a combination of expanding their own range and restricting that of others. If none of that makes sense to you yet, let's take a look at the power of social range in action. This is not a political channel. There will be no political predictions or endorsements. But politics is a fascinating arena because when it comes to social dominance dynamics, they are never more visible than when there's something concrete to compete over. With all that being said, ladies and gentlemen, Donald Trump. It's 2015. Businessman and television personality Donald Trump has launched his bid to become the Republican candidate for the President of the United States of America. Right now he's on the debate stage, and with his campaign already in the ascendancy, he's about to face some difficult questions from moderator Megyn Kelly.
You've called women you don't like fat pigs, dogs, slobs, and disgusting animals.
Remember how we looked at range expanders and restrictors? This is a move to restrict Trump's range of possible actions. In this case, his words. Kelly has attempted to set boundaries for him by applying pressure based on moral and social norms. But Trump is a formidable range expander, so you probably know what's coming. Before Kelly even reaches the end of her question, Trump's expression shifts and a smirk plays across his face as he sees an opportunity to expand his range even further.
Slobs and disgusting animals. Your Twitter account...
Only Rosie O'Donnell.
In this and other debates, Trump continues to push the boundaries of acceptable conduct. as he ridicules one opponent after another. Despite many attempts, he simply refuses to allow limits to be placed on his range of haters. In the end, his opponents stop trying to restrict his range and instead start expanding their own, with mixed success. So is social dominance just about violating social norms? Being willing to go further than other people in a kind of antisocial game of chicken? And how do they get away with it? The short answer is positive emotion. The longer answer has to do with something called benign violation theory. Developed by these guys, benign violation theory is a leading theory about what makes something funny. Yeah, there are really people that study that. The central idea is that for something to be funny, it has to fulfill two key conditions. First, there must be some sort of norm violation, a break in expectations, whether it's moral, social, or physical. Second, it must be perceived as benign. This means that the situation is not overly threatening, offensive, or upsetting. This is what makes the difference between humor and rudeness. So, what makes it benign? Well, that brings us to the next part of our formula. This time, straight from the 5-factor model. Extroversion. When you think of extroversion, you might imagine somebody who's comfortable in a group, doing all the talking and being the center of attention. So it's already a socially dominant trait in that sense. And we're just stating the obvious here, right? Well, don't forget that a key part of the power of extroversion is positive emotion. You have the outgoing, social, gregarious are all part of it, but so are warmth, optimism, and positivity. And it's these positive emotions that build trust in other people and make violating social norms more acceptable. You might say that if range is what allows you to set the rules of the game, extroversion, it's how you make sure other people are willing to keep playing. To illustrate this point, let's step back into the world of politics, and take a look at another person trying to expand their range, but this time without the positive emotion to go alongside it. It's presidential debate time in the year 2000 election cycle. George W. Bush is speaking, and his opponent Al Gore is watching, waiting for his moment. Suddenly, he makes a move toward Bush, invading his personal space. A social violation. The audience goes quiet. Without missing a beat, Bush turns toward Gore, smiles, and nods. The audience tension breaks into laughter as Gore retreats with a self-conscious look. Clearly, Gore's attempt to dominate the situation failed. Again, range allows you to test the boundaries of the socially acceptable, but extroversion is what enables you to bring others along with you. It's easy to imagine how Trump's social violation could have landed differently, with a quiet, serious delivery. Equally, Gore could have been effective in undermining Bush if he'd been able to open up and let the audience in on his game. I'm sure you can think of a time when you've seen a normally reserved person try something a little different, and maybe will try to reinvent themselves at a new school or workplace. Get that not quite right feeling. They probably need a little more of certain aspects of extroversion. But what else are they missing? Stability. Perhaps the best way to explain stability is through its opposite, neuroticism. Neuroticism is a tendency to be destabilized by negative emotion. Feelings such as anxiety, rejection, melancholy, anger, or self-consciousness. So people with higher stability are less susceptible to these negative emotions. To witness the power of stability, let's take a look at another arena where social dominance games are always on show. Martial arts. It's the press conference for UFC 229, and Conor McGregor, an individual generally extremely high in both extroversion and range, and some say high on other things, but that's not for me to comment, is about to make another scene. By this point, given some of the controversial characters we featured, you may be wondering whether you have to be a bit of a to effectively compete in social dominance games. The answer is not necessarily. You may also be wondering, where is the formula that this video is supposedly about? So here it is. Range plus extroversion multiplied by stability. Conor's interaction with Khabib Nurmagomedov in this press conference is a good example of a dynamic you often see in world-level professional fighters. The unstoppable force versus the immovable object. Now, in an upcoming video, we'll be continuing to explore this formula for social dominance with a series of archetypes. So subscribe if you'd like to see that. One of the archetypes we'll be looking at is a domineer. This is somebody who relies on extroversion and range to dominate social situations. But the domineer's lack of stability means that as soon as they come up against somebody who's unmoved by their overwhelming force, they suddenly seem very whelming. Nurmagomedov can't match McGregor when it comes to extroversion. He's never going to make as much noise or get the audience going in the same way. He's unlikely to match him in range either. McGregor is particularly good at pushing people's buttons by crossing lines in all the right places. But he doesn't need to. If he's high enough in stability to be unaffected by McGregor's antics, then all he needs to do is display enough extroversion to make himself heard when needed, and enough range to show that he hasn't been put down or restricted. That's why stability is a multiplier in the formula. Whether it's achieved through a naturally unemotional temperament or having developed the ability to feel strong emotions and not be overtaken by them, stability is a power that backs up the phrase, "No one can make you feel inferior without your consent." Still, all three variables are important. So the next time you find yourself in a competitive social situation, maybe you'll consider how the different participants stack up against this formula. And if you've ever wondered why you often end up in the same kind of role while interacting with others, almost like a typecast actor, well, having a simple framework for breaking down the dynamics can help you to understand why that is. Our next video on social dominance archetypes will make that a lot easier. So get subscribed if you're interested in that. Thanks for watching. See you soon.